We've just read through, of course, part of the news there. Key part, obviously, of what the U.S. response would be, I imagine, to this national security law in Hong Kong. Your first reaction to the news?
Well, my first reaction is no surprise at all. I think that right now China and U.S. are playing a little tit for tat. It's who can be the most punishing. But the law is coming in. The security law is coming in, and I think the Americans just wanted to, get a one-up on them and say, and put, say we're going to punish you in some way. So my reaction is, that's what happened is inevitable.
Right. And you think, in terms of the law itself, when that gets put in place, you think that's no problem?
No, and the reason, if you go back to the negotiations between the British and the Chinese before the handover took place, they included this requirement, and they said do it as quickly as possible. Article 23 was put in a security law. And unfortunately, the Hong Kong legislature couldn't accomplish that, so at this point, the riots of last year in Hong Kong made it necessary, I'd say, for the Chinese government to say if it can't be done by the Hong Kong legislature, we will do it ourselves. And that's exactly what's happening.
Jim, it's Tom here in Beijing. It seems like at this current stage, the impact is relatively limited. This decision to, for example, restrict the exports of high-tech goods and products to Hong Kong. The concern, I guess, longer term is that the US is just starting off in chipping away this special trading status and that more measures are in the pipeline. Is that something that you're going to be watching, the business community in Hong Kong is ultimately going to be concerned about?
First I would say that I don't think Hong Kong itself and this dynamic economy we've had for many, many decades is based on the United States. I think it's based on the Hong Kong people, hardworking, smart, and they just adapt to any rules that are put in place about them. I think it's a global city, and it works with nations all over the world, and now a lot more with China, of course, since over the last several decades. So I think whatever the U.S. does in any regard is not going to be a real problem for Hong Kong. I don't see any major adjustments or penalties or anything that's going to take place in Hong Kong. So I think, as Hong Kong's been rated the freest economy in the world for so long, I think that, will continue to be right up at the top somewhere, top 1, 2, or 3. And I don't think this is going to change it. I think that the U.S. is really trying to punish China. And in fact, I don't think the U.S. really wants to hurt Hong Kong. They're supposedly trying to help Hong Kong. So I don't think the penalties will be that severe as far as Hong Kong is concerned.
Your business is obviously focused on logistics and relocations. Are you seeing any increase in demand amongst the expat community to look to other destinations beyond Hong Kong?
There has been an increase. Recently, COVID has stopped most moving activity, but there has been an increase. But in reality, much of the increase has to do with cost of operating in Hong Kong more than the political considerations. Of all the people I've talked to, and I think the American Chamber just did a survey and said 70% of the people of the companies here said we're not going anywhere, and the other 30 are just putting in a contingency, not necessarily moving, but putting in a contingency if there's a worst-case scenario. So I don't think there's going to be, we don't see an exodus, and I don't think there's going to be an exodus. Hong Kong is a transient city for many individuals or executives living here, and that's always happened throughout the years. And I don't see any major jump in our business as far as that's concerned. So I think people realize that Hong Kong is such a dynamic part of this major Asian growth and economy that this is still the place to be. So where else would you go? I mean, maybe Singapore, but it's much better to be close to China. So I think Hong Kong will still have all its huge advantages of operating here.
We're going to be speaking to a Chinese economist or a China economist later in the show from ING, who says that if you get these tariff exemptions that Hong Kong currently enjoys removed by the US, it's going to impact ports, logistics and shipping services. Is that a legitimate concern, and are you doing anything to mitigate a potential impact along those lines?
I don't know what specifically he's referring to, because we don't see that imposing any restrictions on us. as you know, the Hong Kong sells more to the United States than it buys. So, and we're a free port to start with. So, what kind of restrictions can be put on this place in terms of the logistics side? They can't impose tariffs because they don't have any. Maybe tariffs into the U.S., which just sort of hurts them. But we're not a major export city anyhow anymore. Most of that's China. We're a bit of a re-export city. And so I don't see it hurting the trade side at all. I think Hong Kong will absolutely be fine with the industries that operate here, and particularly, obviously, the financial industry.
And Jim, of course, on top of Crown, you sit on the boards of many companies as well here in Hong Kong. Your advisor on, it's obviously a political issue. It's also become a business issue because we have seen a lot of businesses really having to pick a side, if you will, just for the lack of a more complex way to describe that choice. What would you say to businesses that seem to be caught in between here? How do they thread this sort of sensitive issue?
Well, you cannot, if you're a business person, an international business person, you cannot ignore the dynamicism of this part of the world. So I think that if I were going to say take one side or the other, certainly you want to be here in this part of the world rather than have to, the U.S. economy itself. So I think that I would recommend that they entrench here and actually expand because, as many people have said, this is the Asian century. As China not only becomes a production center but also becomes a consuming center, it's very, very hard to say, well, we're not going to pay much attention to that part of the world. And that would include Southeast Asia as well. There's an incredible amount of wealth here and a great desire to consume. So I think that most businesses would find that they want to be in this part of the world, and they're not going to leave just because of the games that are being played between China and the United States.
And Jim, final question, just your assessment or assumptions over the next, I would say, 18 months or so. It's obviously been a very difficult 18 months for Hong Kong with everything that's happened, the pandemic, the latest one, obviously. Your assumptions on when we might see actually a recovery really take shape and take place in Hong Kong?
Well, we're already seeing it. It's, the domestic economy is going gangbusters in terms of getting, the restaurants and the shopping and with discounts and that side. Only the travel side is still quite restricted. My view is that the economy will come back very quickly the second half of this year and certainly into next year. And, it's just the nature of Hong Kong. It always bounces back very quickly from any dilemmas it faces, financial or medical or political. And I think that I'm very positive about the outlook for China. And even the markets are showing that, as you showed in the beginning of your program this afternoon.